After the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's West Asia outreach, India is now hosting Iran's President Hassan Rouhani. The president landed in Hyderabad earlier today. He'll be in the city for 2 days. He'll offer prayers at the Makkah Masjid tomorrow and also visit the Golconda Fort and Salar Jung Museum. Connectivity and energy security will be high on the agenda as Prime Minister Modi holds talks with Mr. Rouhani over the weekend. WION's senior correspondent Ramesh Ramachandran joining me on the show right now from the WION newsroom. Good evening, Ramesh. It seems like the bonhomie and the diplomacy is there for all to see. The Gulf is being bridged in many ways. How significant is the fact that this is an Iranian president that's made his way over to India?
Good evening, Aisha. This is the first visit by President Rouhani to India since coming to power in 2013. Now, the Iranian president is an infrequent traveler, and therefore, to that extent, when he is visiting India, it is significant, no less. But that said, the context of the visit is equally important. It comes at a time when Israel and Iran tensions are on the rise in West Asia. It's manifesting itself inside Syria for one. And India will seek to leverage its relations with Iran going forward, especially in terms of connectivity and energy security.
Right, and Ramesh, of course, as you mentioned, this comes at an interesting time in terms of Iran's position vis-a-vis the rest of the world, especially President Donald Trump. He has, of course, indicated his desire to scrap the Iranian nuclear deal. Even though a number of other parties and signatories to that deal have discouraged him from doing so. In this scenario, what sort of role does India play, therefore, given the kind of isolation that Iran is facing from what is considered one of the most powerful democracies in the world?
Aisha, the American sanctions or the threat of it have been a constant problem in India-Iran relations. A few years ago, India had a problem with paying money for the oil imports from Iran. India did many options on the table, especially via German banks and Turkish banks. But of late, the situation has stabilized. But Trump's coming to power and is threatening with more sanctions on Iran and threatening to withdraw the U.S. from the Iran nuclear deal have added a new dimension to the India's ties with Iran. And the question before India is, can it insulate its ties with Iran against the fluctuation in American policies? And that is a challenge, to my mind, as far as India's ties with Iran go.
Absolutely. And of course, the word dehyphenation has been coming up a lot, Ramesh. You and I talked about it tremendously during Prime Minister Modi's visit to Palestine earlier this month. And I think the other thing that sort of came up at that point was how Mr. Modi's visits to Palestine, to the other countries in West Asia demonstrated India's attempts at a multipolar sort of relationship with all of these countries. Can we see the visit by Iran's president also as a demonstration of how India wants to pursue this new form, or at least this new way of foreign policy?
Absolutely. India has sought to establish good ties with all countries of consequence in the region and beyond, especially its neighbors, be it on the eastern frontier in Southeast Asia or in West Asia and the Persian Gulf. Now, we've seen Prime Minister Modi travel extensively in West Asia. He has visited all countries of consequence, be it Iran, be it Saudi Arabia, be it Israel, be it Palestine. So, in a sense, this is another example of this government's dexterity insofar as foreign policy goes. It wants to have good relations with all countries of consequence and manage the contradictions that exist between individual countries in the region.
Right. And Ramesh, geographically speaking also, I mean, Iran is of supreme significance for India. Until 1947, of course, as your report pointed out, India and Iran, in fact, shared a border. And given the relationship that's developing between Pakistan and China, I suppose India's relationship with Iran also takes a supreme significance in the South Asia region.
Well, clearly, Aisha, if you look at the contemporary history of India-Iran relations, there have been many ups and downs, crests and troughs. But what actually clinched the deal, as it were, for India was the strategic significance of connectivity, especially the Chabahar port. Now, we've seen that Pakistan is denying India transit rights to send commodities to Afghanistan, and therefore India sees in Chabahar a good opportunity to build bridges with Afghanistan, Central Asia and beyond. So clearly Chabahar has strategic importance for India, especially in light of its proximity of being in the vicinity of the Gwadar port, which India sees with suspicion, given the fact that Chinese state company is been operating the port for the next 40-odd years.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Ramesh, thanks for putting everything in perspective for us. We'll, of course, rely on you further for more updates on Mr. Rouhani's visit to India.